Good afternoon, everyone. We will begin our lecture forum this afternoon. I'd like to invite everyone to please stand for the opening prayer to be led by Billy Kuya, who is a fourth-year health sciences student.
Let us all remember that we are in the holy presence of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for giving us this chance to talk about Dr. Jose Rizal, not just as our national hero, but also as a man of science and a man for others. Open our hearts and minds as we explore this other aspect of the hero we thought we already knew. May this be the beginning of our newfound appreciation for Dr. Jose Rizal. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Please be seated. Thank you, Billy. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Marife Yap. I am the Associate Dean for Planning and Administration at the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health over in Ortigas. This afternoon's lecture forum is the fifth offering in the Loyola School's Rizal and the Disciplines lecture series, which explores Rizal's forays into the fields of study that roughly constitute today's academic disciplines. This particular lecture forum this afternoon is actually jointly organized by the School of Science and Engineering and the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. That is why I am here. When we were discussing this very early on at the beginning of the celebratory events for the celebration of 150th birthday of Rizal, the various school units within our university were invited to actually celebrate his birthday through certain events, and this lecture forum is one of those. And so for this afternoon, we're looking into the aspect of Rizal as the scientist and the doctor, and we have called the lecture or the input Rizal's Science, a Struggle for Faith, Reason, and Knowledge. I'd like to invite now Dean Toby Dairit of the School of Science and Engineering to give us words of welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Yap. I'm very pleased on behalf of the School of Science and Engineering to welcome all of you and to publicly thank the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health for really coming together to put this program in place. It's a unique program in a way because we are delving into an area which is not so familiar. We know about the paintings that Rizal was an ophthalmologist and his training as a medical doctor. But beyond that, it's really more well known as a literary, and of course a revolutionary. And certainly there are many things we need to discover about our national hero. We're very fortunate this afternoon to have with us some very key people, I believe. We're very happy that Dr. Michael Tan has agreed to give the keynote lecture. And we have a man of wisdom and experience who will be one of the reactors. And we have two students, one from the Health Sciences program and another one from the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. So as you can see, between the four people, they represent generations of experience and knowledge, and hopefully it's these different generations that will help us understand Rizal's role more, both as a scientist, as a medical doctor. I'm sure we'll have many interesting insights and comments, and hopefully this will contribute to continued discovery of Dr. Jose Rizal. So I'd like to welcome you again to the Ateneo and look forward to a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Salamat, Toby. Majority of the students here I know are really from the Loyola schools and largely from maybe health sciences. We have very few medical students who are here. It's a little bit difficult for us. But we're hoping that with the video and audio recording, we can also share whatever will transpire this afternoon with our medical students. For those of you who do not know, we do teach social science in our medical curriculum from the first to the third year, and we try to bring this component out even in the discussions in our clinics. So this is a very important dimension as well. So, moving on into the most important part of this afternoon's activity. As we all know, our main speaker, our keynote lecturer for this afternoon is Dr. Michael Tan. He did not want to say much about himself. There are only 3 lines here that he has written. But si Mike namamangka sa maraming ilog. And the one nice thing about him, at least in a very personal note, is when I call and ask, Mike, pwede ba ka bang magturo or pwede mo ba kaming tulungan? He's always said yes. Medyo malakas ako kay Mike. Salamat sa Diyos. Mike is a medical anthropologist, but he actually trained in veterinary medicine. And he's currently Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy at the UP Diliman. He's also a clinical professor at the College of Medicine in UP Manila. They have a master in medical anthropology now, free plugging. An affiliate professor at the College of Science at UP Diliman and the Tri-College Philippine Studies program. More importantly, Mike has been teaching with us in the health unit in our MBA health program, teaches health, culture, and society for our doctors and other students at the Rockwell campus. And he's also our faculty for our social science and medicine subjects at the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. As you know, Mike is a columnist at the Inquirer. He writes a column called Pinoy Kasi that comes out 2 times a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. I read Mike's column because sometimes I mention, so I'm happy. And Mike has written many journal articles and books, the latest of which is Revisiting Usok, Pasma, Kulam, published in 2008, and Thinking and Doing Culture, published by the UST Press in 2011. The 3 discussants that we have invited, when we were organizing this, we said they're not really reactors to the talk, but more additions to whatever will be given in the keynote. And so, as Dr. Dairit has already mentioned, we invited 3 persons to represent different phases of one who is in the journey of becoming a physician or a health professional. And they will give their commentaries after Mike's keynote lecture. And I'll introduce them now. The first discussant is Mr. John Valdez, who is a multi-talented leader who hopes to make a difference in society, especially in health policies and development. And his choice of being in the health sciences program was a choice to be trained as a Filipino professional. Si Dr. Shaw Marquez ang nagsulat niyan, binabasa ko lang. John Valdez is a 3rd-year health sciences program student, and maybe in 2 years will be with us in the ASMPH, I hope. Our next discussant is almost there, being a doctor, Harvey Joy Liwanag of the pioneer class of 2012 of the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. Harvey is now what is known as a medical intern, alipin sa ospital. And what we are sure of is that Harvey will not become an obstetrician gynecologist. Harvey graduated from the Ateneo de Manila, BS Biology in 2006. Waited for us to open in ASMPH for a year and entered the ASMPH in 2007. In my conversation with him yesterday, Harvey says that he's hoping and considering that after he passes the board in August of 2012, he is exploring a possibility of setting up some practice in Mindanao. And our third discussant, it's hard to introduce. Our third discussant is Dr. Alfredo Bengzon, Vice President for Professional Schools at the Ateneo and Dean at the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. A doctor and neurologist by training, also President and CEO of the Medical City, former Secretary of Health during the time of President Cory, involved in many, many things and currently passionate about making patients partners and the world of molecular medicine. So the flow of this afternoon will be that Mike will deliver his keynote lecture, and then we will invite the three discussants to give their commentaries. Then we will have some open forum thereafter. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Michael Tan.
Thank you, Marife. I'm going to start by mentioning this is actually my third Rizal lecture since June, because it's the sesquicentennial. Everyone seems to be organizing around something around Rizal. So the first talk I gave was actually in the UP College of Medicine, focusing very generally on Rizal, the physician. And then we had our big conference in UP Diliman, where I talked about Rizal, the anthropologist, a less known side about Rizal. And then today, it would really be more of Rizal the scientist to include Rizal the medical person. But I have to tell you, this was the most difficult paper to prepare. As was mentioned by Dr. Toby Dairit, there's a lot of material. We know of Rizal for Noli and Pili, we know him even for his artwork. And despite the doctor, there's very little we know about that side of him as a physician and as a scientist. He never published in the natural science journals or the medical journals, but he has a lot of stuff out in the social sciences. So I had to bring them together, and the more I worked on this paper, the more I realized we really need to do much more to bring out Rizal the scientist, because I'm going to assert here that Rizal the patriot, Rizal the hero, Rizal the visionary would not have existed without Rizal the scientist. Rizal the scientist is the very foundation for Rizal the national hero. Okay, can I have the first slide, please? The title I know is intriguing. We're going to see also that Rizal the scientist grapples constantly with faith issues. Okay, the biographies of Rizal tend to be hagiographies. They describe him as a saint and a genius. And there's one particular biography that came out a few years ago that lists all these, describes Rizal as, I counted, that's 37 fields where he was supposed to excel. And I'm sure some of those names up there probably are intriguing you. No? I mean, kasama ang magician. No? Seems to have been a good magician. A fencer, a physical culturist. Can we go to the next slide, please? Or do we have a remote here? Okay. A conchologist. What's a conchologist? Biology major. A shell, he was known, he loved shells, no? And he had a collection of shells, which makes him a conchologist. Dito lang, please. Botanist, businessman, etc., etc. And then look at the last one, a prognosticator. We'll leave it to the English majors to decide what we're talking about here. Okay, maybe more importantly, the biographies, besides giving all these, listing all these accomplishments of Rizal, they tend to use two perspectives to explain Rizal. One is to attribute all of this to an innate genius. Sometimes it's even essentialized, the pride of the Malay race, like he was born a genius. Others naman, especially when they're written by Americans, tend to credit Rizal's accomplishments to his exposure to European and American ideas. So it's mainly an exposure to Western liberalism that allowed Rizal to bloom. And working on the three Rizal papers, especially this last one, made me realize that it's unfair, really, to Rizal, because his life, as with all our lives, whether we're geniuses or not, are pretty complicated, and you can't have very simplistic explanations to talk about why they became who they are. And to understand Rizal as a hero, I'm hoping that we can himayin natin. I want to bring out the context of his times so that you too might be able to relate to him. So the focus of my talk today is Rizal and science. And to start out, I wanted to zero in on the Latin scientia. Some of you probably know that Rizal gave two sculptures to Ferdinand Blumentritt, who we'll be going back to later on. The one with the skull there and the woman, that's the triumph of death over life. And some people have said the person who's hooded is actually a friar. People who don't like the Catholic Church says it's a metaphor for the Catholic Church being oppressive. No? But I don't think that was the actual intention of Rizal. No? The one on the right is Scientia, so showing a woman standing on a skull. No? And it's often referred to as the triumph of science over death. No? There is a replica in the UP College of Medicine in Pedro Hill. But Humberto Campo very rightly points out that it may have been a mistranslation because the original title was Ciencia, and because Rizal was a good Latin student in Ateneo, he probably was not thinking of Ciencia as science, but Ciencia as knowledge. And very basically, this is really the triumph of knowledge over death. We will, of course, never know what the actual intention was, but I would like to think, too, that it was Ciencia as knowledge. So Rizal's science was a struggle for knowledge, not surprising, of course, given the turbulent times he lived in. And I wanted to describe those times for you to understand what was going on. The late 18th century saw the French and American revolutions with ideas of liberty and equality galvanizing the imagination of people throughout the world, and especially the Spanish Empire. Things were happening very quickly. It was a Spanish mestizo priest, Miguel Hidalgo, who had his famous El Grito, the shout, parang crying balintawak, except this was a priest in Mexico in a church, marking the beginning of the Mexican Revolution in 1810. Within 2 years, Spain lost her possessions in Latin America to all of her men. She lost Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, El Salvador, Mexico, Paraguay, and Venezuela to nationalist insurrections that were actually headed by Spanish mestizos who had taken on new national identities. They were no longer Spaniards, they were Bolivians and Chileans. So by the mid-19th century, all that was left to Spain were Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. Further complicating life for the Spaniards, there was political unrest in Spain itself, struggles within the aristocracy, and the rise and fall of Republican liberals, people who wanted a republic rather than a monarchy, and people who espoused liberalism as a political ideology. And the Philippines was not spared these storms. In 1861, the year that Rizal was born, Pedro Peláez, a Spanish mestizo, became the Vicar Capitular for Manila, and was actually a liberal who encouraged more participation from the native clergy. This is very controversial, and the Spanish friars resented this. In 1869, when Rizal was 8, Queen Isabella II was deposed in Spain, and the liberal government installed. As a consequence, a liberal governor-general, Carlos Maria de la Torre, was appointed to the Philippines. And when he arrived, he was welcomed by local liberals headed by a Spanish mestizo physician, Joaquin Pardo de Tavera. My point here is that you had liberals already in the Philippines as early as the 1860s, and they were very, very active. You'll notice that I've also been using racial terms. Now, I do this intentionally because the 19th century was intensely racial. Anthropology, my field, was emerging, and they were fixated over races and racial differences, mainly to say that the Europeans were a superior race and everyone else was inferior, and therefore needed to be colonized. The problem for Spain was that they feared the Creoles. These were the mestizos in their colonies. They felt that the tropical climate had degenerated them and they were not as smart as the Spaniards born in Spain. And yet these guys were taking over countries, they were becoming too nationalistic, and they were worried about this. In the Philippines, the situation was further complicated by the mestizos de Sangles, or Chinese mestizos, who were offspring of Chinese migrants and Filipino women. Many of you probably know Rizal was actually a fourth generation Chinese mestizo. And the Chinese mestizos were a prosperous class, their children able to get a higher education and getting funny ideas. So Spain feared them as well. So let's go back to Rizal. I sort of dropped him on the way. In 1869, when he was 8, there was student unrest in University of Santo Tomas, where a certain Father Jose Burgos was implicated together with his students for agitating the other students there. Among Father Burgos' followers was Pasiano Rizal, Jose Rizal's elder brother. After the liberal government in Spain fell, it did so as well in the Philippines, and unrest in the Philippines reached a head with the Cavite Mutiny and the Gombor's martyrdom in 1872. You all know, of course, the 3 groups here. So Rizal was 11 at that time, and I am very sure the execution made an impression on him. And many years later, Rizal was to dedicate his novel Pili and Filibusterismo to the 3 priests. That same year, Rizal was sent to Manila to study in Manila. And here I thought also it would be good to make history more alive. Manila was not some backwater colony of Spain. There's a new book out from the Ateneo Press that says that there were 3 Asian cities in the 19th century that were very global and cosmopolitan. These were Malacca, in what is Malaysia today, Batavia, which is now Jakarta, and Manila. And Irving says Manila was the most developed of the 3 because of flourishing trade and commerce. We had universities, we had an active printing press. You know, the idea of a very backward Philippines was actually propagated by the Americans when they came in because they wanted to justify their occupation of the Philippines. So they said Spain was backward, nothing was happening here, medicine was superstitious and all, which was not true. If you get Irving's book, he has prints in there showing Manila. These were people from all over the world. We even had Africans who were visiting the Philippines. And if you read Irving's book, it's very colorful. You can almost see, Manila was full of cathedrals and churches and universities. It was very, very cosmopolitan. And he said it was filled with music as well. Okay, here's one of the prints from that book now showing children playing out in the streets. Maybe very quickly, I should remind you that we were a hub as well for a vaccination campaign in the early 19th century. Children were sent out from Spain, inoculated with smallpox. Then they were brought to Mexico, and then they took the inoculum and vaccinated children in Mexico, then took Mexican children and brought them to the Philippines. It's an amazing expedition which many people are not aware of. Naawa nga ako, I read the reports. These were 5- and 6-year-olds who were taken away from their nanays to save people from smallpox, but it was an amazing expedition. We had the Carriedo Waterworks in the 19th century, just to remind you again that Spain was not that backward and neither was Manila. And the printing press thing, there was a Flora de Filipinas published in 1883 with full-color plates of plants in the Philippines. So this was not being done in any other country in Asia at that time. Okay, I wish I could talk more about that. Let's get back to Rizal. Oops, I'm sorry. How do I go? Can someone help me here? I'm technologically handicapped. Can we go back to Rizal at 18? If you look at, some of you were probably intrigued with Rizal there, kanina. There's a picture of him that was Rizal at 18. Looking at the photograph of Rizal at 18, I couldn't help but think of him backwards. To the back. Back. One more. Every time I look at this picture, it's because I know something about what was happening when he was 18. Don't you think he looks very impish here? No? He looks so young, no? But ako yung 18 siya, he's almost impish. No? And the reason I think he has an impish look is because while researching for the Rizal papers, I found a letter that he had written to a European scholar, Adolf Meyer. Meyer had written asking about a certain plant in the Philippines, and Rizal had written back saying that he knew about the plant. This was in March 5, 1890. He said he not only knew the plant, he had actually used the plant. The plant was hashish, better known as marijuana. Okay, so that's him, 18, that year he used it. Now I have to say, Rizal did not use hashish bought from some dark corner in Intramuros. Rizal said he actually bought it from a drugstore, and indeed marijuana kasi it was a medicine at that time. Times have really changed. I was intrigued though because hashish wasn't an ordinary drug to be used for trivial ailments. So it was available from the drugstore, but it wasn't like paracetamol or medical, but you bought it for rather serious ailments. And I was wondering what an 18-year-old, look at him, was doing with hashish, and why many years later he would still recall the exact year when he tried